Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people around the world. This is Martin Hubel, your host of the DB2Night show. And today is an LUW show with our good friend and great speaker, George Baklarz from the IBM Toronto Lab. How are you doing today, George?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks a lot, Martin. How about yourself?
Things are good here. The weather's fine. I'm feeling good. We've got only 12 sleeps left till Christmas. And so we're all set to go here. Fortunately, we've had mostly rain the last week instead of snow, so we're able to get around on a nice, bright, sunny day here in southern Ontario. So life is good. Okay, let's carry on, and we'll move the slide deck forward. Here's our social media page, as always. I hope you're following hashtag DB2Night, because I've been putting announcements up there about upcoming shows, as well as our LinkedIn group. And feel free to join that as well and get the inside scoop on the show and to make suggestions about the show, speakers and other things we should or shouldn't be doing. We're always trying to learn and make the show more interesting for our followers and attendees. Here's our normal disclaimer. I've given up on reading this. You can read it for yourself. Everything's being recorded. Everything's copyrighted by various people. And be nice. And there you go. Here are standard things we'll be doing, quick announcements on upcoming shows, the polls, and then we'll get on to George and wrap it up. As always, with audience Q&A, there is a little tool that is available through GoToWebinar. If you put your questions in there, I will follow those and read those out to the audience as needed. If I start to fade or something else goes wrong, you can also make comments on what we need to fix technically to make the show more enjoyable and meaningful for you and the rest of the audience. So let's move along. Upcoming shows. This is our last DB2LUW show for the year, seeing as we're in December. That's hardly a surprise. Next month we have Michael Roken on advanced log space management. That's a good technical presentation. If you're a techie, you'll want to catch that show. I have yet to line up something for Valentine's Day. That'll be our February show. And I've got Toby Haynes from the IBM Toronto Lab speaking on March the 6th. Next week, to wrap up the Z show for the year, we've got Tony Andrews. That will actually be an awful lot of crossover into the LUW realm because it's best developer features, and most of the things that work these days on DB2 on Z work on DB2 LUW, so that would be of interest to everyone to watch that show. And we also have Craig Mullins joining us at the end of January with another presentation on developer topics. I have the title, I just didn't get around to putting it on. I will have the registration information available this afternoon when I do the post-processing on the show so that you can enroll for Michael and for Craig. And the next date after that will be February 21. I have dates set on my calendar, and I've got some speakers lined up going out to June. So we're looking forward to a good winter spring with the DB2Night show. As always, there's a demo. If you watch it, you get a free Starbucks card, I believe. If you have to register to watch it, then they'll send you a link to get you free coffee. So you might want to watch that again, maybe get another cup of coffee. It's a good show. And later on, I'll have a short commercial break showing some screens of the upcoming version of DBI software. And our winner from last show is Dave Snyder of Cigna. He's been awarded a gift certificate. And as always, our speakers are DBI Software. They are the founder of the DB2Night show. And yours truly, Martin Hubel Consulting. I'm the host of both the Z and the LUW shows. All right, now we're into the polls. Only a couple of polls today. We're going to keep it short today. But let's see what we got here. Select poll, launch. What versions of DB2 LUW are you currently running? Okay, we're give that a little more, people a little more time to vote. All right, we'll close that off and share the results. We see that 75% of our audience says 11-1. 100% of our audience says 10-5. It's like any of the shops I work in. We have multiple versions we have to support. Some of them going back to 9.7, unfortunately, but we're working to get those replaced and up to date so that they'll be back in support. Like that.
Well, it's good to see there's nobody on version 7 or 8.
No, I had a mainframe customer on version 7, and there was this steel mill in Northern Ontario, and it was running their production. What other DBMSs? Oh, this is a really fairly light question. I meant to update it, but that's been my morning today. Everything seemed to go wrong. And I was setting up my machine to run the show. I had a quick reboot I had to do, and that kind of put me behind. But so I'll close that off and just share that result, and we'll move on and get on with the show here. So that was 50% on with C, and everybody has lots of DBMSs these days. So George, I'm ready to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks.
Please take as much time as you need. I know people will hang around if we go over, so don't worry if that happens. But with that, I will find the attendees. George, there you are, make presenter. Click that, yes. And now you are in control.
There we go, great. Hey, Martin, I think we could have a really good session one of these days, and we'll call it the most screwed up features and mistakes ever made in DB2 development. I'm sure everybody has a favorite syntax that they say, how did they ever come up with this one? You know?
Yeah, that's been going, that list has been going on for a long time for me. But there again, too, I can also add to that with customer war stories as well. So.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, how much of it is that can we legally talk about, right? Anyways, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining this session, and happy holidays. I'm going to talk about some of the development aspects, some of the new stuff we're doing with DB2, and specifically I'm going to talk about something called Jupyter Notebooks. So like with any good IBM presentation, there's our disclaimer as well. Just add that to the one that Martin had there, and then we'll cover just about everything. But what I'm going to do today is cover what are Jupyter Notebooks, for those of you who don't know what those are, and tell you why you should care about them and why they can be useful for both application development, for DBA work, and for sharing information among a number of users. I'm going to go into what they are, how they work, how to get them up and running, the type of SQL you can do with it, some of the advanced stuff, and then give you a bunch of resources to help you get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the slide deck, and then if we have any time at the end, we'll obviously open it up for questions. We will give you a copy of the entire presentation. And I'm going to show you a demo of this stuff working and some links where you can go and try it out yourself. So that's one of the things that we've been trying to do lately, is create more and more self-service assets so that you can go and reserve an actual instance of DB2 running in the cloud. You know, we give you 4 hours or a day or a week of time where you can actually try some of this stuff out on your own. So it's kind of self-paced education, but very targeted in terms of what you want to learn. So I'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation. So again, we are going to give you the copy of this presentation, so no need to take pictures of the screens or, you know, crazily write down stuff. We will give you a copy of everything. So let's first talk a little bit about Jupyter Notebooks. They were actually developed as part of an offshoot of Python, because Python is an interpretive language. And by the way, it's funny, you know, everything old is new again, right? Python's been around for 20 years, and now it's one of the most popular programming languages. And so when they developed Python, because it's interpretive, you want to be able to run it from a command line and iterate your development. And so out of that came an IPython project, which is a way of creating on the screen both documentation and coding at the same time. So it ends up being two types of cells. One cell is for documenting stuff using a language called Markdown, And the code itself was primarily Python, but it has extended over the years to do a lot more stuff than just Python. You can now do languages like C and Golang and Java and all sorts of stuff within these notebooks. And computer scientists have loved it because they do a lot of this iterative work, right? And there are lots of statistical libraries and mathematical things and plotting languages and all sorts of stuff written in Python, and they can get instant access to it in the notebook, and kind of as they go, you're actually documenting what you're doing. So it's really great for prototyping. So now let's take a look at this from a development point of view, right? If you're developing some SQL code, you could use one of these notebooks to try things out interactively. I mean, many of you will use a command line, right? Or you'll use a notebook or notepad or something to write your code and try it in CLP or whatever your favorite editor is. But this gives you another alternative. So think of it as like a scrolling sheet of paper where I can continue writing my code, capturing my thoughts, as text, and I can share it with other users. So it's really great for development and prototyping. So what do these things look like? Well, they actually look like a Microsoft Word document, right? You've got code and you've got text. And if you take a look, you'll notice this looks like a regular document, right? With titles in it. You've got, a table in there. You've got highlighting. You've got, italics, whatever, different colors. You can have links in there. And then you can see these little sections that are called code. And the reason that you know it's code is you have a little word beside it that says in, okay? And that little box that has the SQL syntax there, you execute that. So that will execute within a Python kernel. Okay, now it doesn't have to be Python, like I said, it could be C or Java or something else. But basically what you're doing is when you say run, it will run that code. Okay, so what I'm going to show you today is how I can make DB2 run in one of these notebooks. So Jupyter notebooks themselves, in order to get them installed, it runs on almost all the platforms, right? So Linux, Mac, Windows, and you view all the content via a browser. So pick your favorite browser, right? Normally you run Jupyter locally on your workstation, and it can be run in a variety of ways. You can either run it natively, so you've installed it on Windows or on Mac or Linux, right? Or you can run it in a Docker container, or in some cases, they will actually create servers, and everybody can go and connect to a server where Jupyter is running, and then your notebooks sit on the server. So the way you access these notebooks is basically the URL for where the server is located. If it's local, you're just using localhost, and 8888 is the port that they use for Jupyter notebooks. So if you want to do it yourself and install these things, you can either go to jupyter.org, which gives you the install image for Jupyter notebooks, and it'll have it for all the different popular environments, or you can go to Anaconda. So what is Anaconda? Well, they are a site that gives you all of the stuff that surrounds Jupyter Notebook. So it's not just the Jupyter Notebook code, it's the Python drivers, it's the statistical libraries, it's Panda notebooks, it's all sorts of stuff that they put into one single distribution. So rather than you having to download all these bits and pieces, it's already done for you. Okay, so I would encourage, if you're going to install it locally on your machine, take a look at the Anaconda distribution because it has everything in it. Now here's a complex Jupyter notebook. So you can see it's a browser. This happens to be running in Linux on Ubuntu. So it's a Chrome browser, but I could use Internet Explorer, it doesn't matter. And there is a screen that looks just like a web page, right? But the thing is I can interact with this. So I can actually go in there, I can run commands, I can do all sorts of stuff. We're gonna demonstrate that a little bit later. But so a Jupyter notebook can be very, very complex in terms of its look and feel. So why do you care about these things? Well, they're used by a lot of people, and probably in your company, right? They're data scientists, researchers, and they do tend to share text and code using Jupyter notebooks. And it encourages trial and error, and it's nice that you're able to document what you were doing, right? Imagine trying to do that with a bunch of little notebooks and clippets and text edits and so on and so forth. So this is a nice way of documenting what you're doing. And if you want to create a new copy, you just say duplicate the notebook, and it's a brand new environment. It never impacts any of the other notebooks. So I think that's a very important point, is each notebook is its own, think of it as own little thread or process that's running. So anything that you do in there in terms of, let's say, database work or analytics is separate from all the other notebooks. So that way you can protect what you're doing. So if you want to do a new test, you create another copy of the notebook and do your stuff in there, okay? Now the downside is there is obviously a learning curve here. You got to understand Python for some of the stuff, right? And the thing is, if you want to use databases, there are some packages out there that you can install and load, but they don't take advantage of all the neat native features that DB2 has. So there are what we call SQL connectors out there, They do work with DB2, and we have drivers for them. But again, they don't understand some of the DB2 syntax, and they aren't as flexible as we'd like them to be. So step one, install Anaconda or Jupyter Notebooks. You can also do it in Docker, by the way. So if you've got a Docker environment, there's actually code there that will create a Jupyter Notebook environment inside a Docker container. And it's brilliant, right? That means I don't have to install any of this Jupyter stuff or Anaconda on my system. I just have to have Docker running, okay? If you do have Jupyter natively on your system, the one thing we do require is something called the DB2 Python driver. So there's a command that is installed as part of Anaconda. It's called easy install, and you put the IBM_DB name, and we will go and get all the drivers and stuff that are required to run DB2 from within a Jupyter Notebook environment when you're using native Python, okay? All right, third thing you need. For all the examples I'm showing you here, there's actually just one file that you need to import into your Jupyter Notebooks. It's called db2.ipynb, and that cryptic thing stands for an interactive Python notebook, okay? And if you want, you can edit that thing and modify it. It is about 5,000 lines of code, which hides all the complexity of dealing with CLI, Python drivers, all sorts of stuff. So you kind of eliminate the requirement for even understanding Python and talking to DB2. So that's one of the reasons we built this, is that a lot of our new education and stuff is taking advantage of these workbooks and Jupyter environment. So we needed a way of being able to show DB2 without having to have to worry about all sorts of drivers and stuff and syntax, okay? Okay, so this all sounds like a pain, right? I either have to install Anaconda and I got to do stuff with Docker or whatever. If you do install Docker, we've got one file up on GitHub, all right? So if you go to this GitHub address that I've shown here, the db2-samples, there is one file you download called db2jupyter.docker. You put it into an empty directory, and I do say it has to be an empty directory. Don't put it in your downloads, okay? And then you do those two commands in a Docker command line interface. Okay? And there's a variety of ways doing Kitematic can do it. In Linux, you can do it directly, right? And Mac, you can do it directly. And so you do those two commands, and it will build and create a Docker container that has both Jupyter Notebooks in it, the DB2 extensions, and at the same time, as an added bonus, also put in all of the DB2 Python notebooks and example code for you to try out. Okay, and then all you have to do then is just point your local Safari or Chrome or whatever and look at localhost 8888, and up will come a table of contents with all sorts of examples for you to try. Okay, that is actually the simplest way of doing all this. There's actually one more way, and I'll share that with you at the end, but it's basically you reserve one of our DB2 instances, and it's all pre-installed for you, and all you need is a browser to access the machine. And you try the things out, and when you're done, the machine goes away and you've never installed anything on your desktop. So easiest way to try our stuff out without having to install anything. Okay, so now what? All right, so now we've got this thing installed, and so we start our Jupyter Notebooks. We got DB2 installed somewhere, and again, we give you Docker install instructions for DB2. You navigate to the notebooks, and then what we do is we upload this DB2 notebook, right? Or you actually put it into the directory where you're going to have all your notebooks. Again, this is done for you if you're using Docker or if you're using one of our pre-built systems. So here's all I have to do in a notebook. Okay, so remember, a notebook has code and it has documentation. So here you can see that is a code line because you get the little word in beside it. And one says that's the first thing I've executed in this notebook. And I say run. Now, the run means take whatever is in the contents of that DB2 file, import it, execute whatever Python that's in there, okay? So you don't see any of this stuff running. All you see at the end is this DB2 extensions loaded. So what it's done, it's gone in, it's run about 5,000 lines of code and created something called magic commands, okay? Magic commands are these special commands that have the little % sign at the front of them. So you'll notice run is a special command, okay? It's not Python, it's something that is unique to the Jupyter Notebook environment. And basically it's used for doing things like executing shell commands, stuff that's got nothing to do with Python or any of your programming languages. So for instance, %sign system will issue a shell command, right? So run db2.ipython notebook, what that does is it loads all the libraries that we need in order to talk to DB2, okay? And it creates two brand new commands in this environment, a single %SQL and a double %SQL command. Those are called either what I call inline SQL command or a single line SQL or a block of SQL. Significant difference between the two of them is %SQL means that all my SQL I'm going to run is on a single line. So if you wanted to, have a very complex command that spans many, many lines, you may be better off using the $% means everything that follows this is SQL, or you have to use a special backslash character. Okay? And I'll demonstrate this a little bit later on. So the simplest way to look at this, if you're just doing a single select or something, just use a %SQL. Or if you've got a set of SQL you want to run, so for instance, create tables, do indexes, do other stuff as a block, then use the $SQL command. Okay. What happens when you say run is that the Jupyter notebook environment said, aha, these things were built as part of that DB2 notebook. So it passes control to us, and then we interpret what it is that you want. Okay, so that's how these %SQL commands work. So step number 1 is that we have to have a connection, all right? So a connection requires us to do things in very similar ways to DB2 CLP, right? You either say connect to the database using all the stuff we're used to, like user, using, host, port. SSL is a special little thing there that says, if I'm going to have a secure connection, I have to say SSL there, so we know that to tell the driver that it's going to be a secure connection, okay? The second one, connect credentials. That's for when you're doing a DB2 on cloud connection. So we actually can connect to a DB2 instance running on our cloud services. And basically that environment gives you credentials, which is a JSON document with all sorts of stuff in it, the user ID, the password, the server, whatever. So all you have to do is say, okay, my name or whatever you want to call it is equal to this connection document, and we just say connect credentials, and we get all the information we need from the JSON document. Connect prompt, basically, yeah, ask me what I want. Reset means I'm basically resetting everything, so I forget everything that I've done in the connect, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And then close means basically just close the connection. I have to reconnect again. So once you've loaded the commands and you've done your connection, right, you've got a couple little extra twists, all right? So let me just show you what they are. The first one is prompt, all right? So prompt basically says, give me the details. What's the name of your database? What's your IP address for this thing or symbolic name, the port number, the basic stuff, right? If you just hit enter at any time with no data, we'll just cancel the connection request, okay? So that's the easiest one. You can also say connect ? And it'll actually give you all sorts of details right behind the connect command. Credentials come from your cloud instance. So if you've signed up, by the way, you can get a free DB2 on cloud light instance. Light means it's free, but you can have at most 200 megabytes of storage used, and it allows at most 5 connections, but it's free, okay? So you can actually try things on DB2 for cloud. You're basically given a schema. You don't have an entire database, you're given a schema, right? So in there, there's something sort of, give me my credentials, and you'll notice it's really a JSON document, and what you do is you say copy, and you paste it into a notebook, and you say my ID or whatever equals this JSON document, and then you just say SQL connect credentials, and we will connect to that DB2 server. Okay, connecting with the values, the connect itself, if you've already done a connection, okay, if you do any SQL in any other notebook, it will automatically connect user credentials that you've already created, okay? So that means that I don't have to connect again. I will just remember your previous connection, okay? So that comes very useful because if you go between notebooks, you don't have to keep remembering to connect to database, whatever will remember it for you. If you have multiple databases on a server, if you just say connect to sample, if you've already connected beforehand with the, IP address and port and everything else, it will remember that, okay? And it'll fill in your user ID and password. So that's the nice thing about using this system is that we keep track of all of this stuff. Okay, so now, oops, sorry, that was interesting. I've never seen PowerPoint decide it doesn't like my presentation and stop. So let's go back to my connect, apologies. Okay, we'll do that again. Okay, so we finished our connection. So now what can you do when we've connected? If, by the way, you have a bad connection, we'll give you the full error message, which you can decide whether that's useful or not, by the way. The actual information is also kept in SQL code, SQL state, and SQL message, so you can actually get it later on if you're actually running a program, right? So you can see here, this information is kept for you. So code, state, and error. If you get a successful connection, it'll say connection successful, and now you can start running SQL commands. Now you notice this is an example where I had a little backslash, right? That I go across 2 lines. The reason why there's a difference between the single SQL %sign and the double SQL is that when Jupyter Notebooks sees a %SQL command, it executes it along with other statements in there. So for instance, you can mix and match a %SQL command with Python code, with other languages, or whatever. When it sees the double SQL, it assumes that everything that's in that block is only SQL. Okay, so you can't mix and match, say, Python with the single %SQL with the double %SQL sign. That's what that means. Okay, so we use single %SQL when we're doing programming or simple, statements. If we're doing big blocks of SQL that we want to run, then we can use the double %SQL. Again, I'll show you some more examples of this. So now that I'm connected, what can I do? Well, you can say SQL select asterisk from employee. It's like hello world, right? And you'll notice you get some results there, and this results are using the default Panda data frame format. Okay, so you kind of look at that and say, that's kind of weird, right? Because I'm only seeing really 10 rows, even though there were 42 rows in this answer set. Well, the reason is that Pandas understands that you're in a Jupyter environment. It's not going to, create 42 rows. They're not going to fit on the screen, all right? So what it does is it says, we're going to give you 10 values by default. So that means it'll give you the first 5 and the last 5 values. And you go like, okay, if I want to see more, I either have to say, give me all the results, or I can use something called the grid format. And the grid is my favorite because grid gives you an actual scrollable table, right? So you can see all the results in a scrollable list. You can sort by column names. You can change the width of the columns, etc. So if you want this to be your default, then you have an option to change that every time you run the notebook. It's actually an option keyword. So there's 4 options, or 5 options actually. Option list tells you what the current settings are. Max rows says, okay, when Panda shows you that abbreviated list, what's the maximum number of rows in that abbreviated list? So 10 means 5 at the beginning, 5 at the end. If you said 20, it will give you 20 at the beginning, 20 at the end. And of course, if your answer set is within that limit, it'll show you everything, okay? Max grid says, if I'm going to give you a scrollable display, how big do you want it on the screen? Okay, so you can say, I want to see 10 lines on the screen at a time. Runtime is for testing your code, and I'll show you that later on. You actually can profile your code and say, hey, I want you to run this statement. Tell me how many times it runs in a second. So here you can say, by default, it's 1, but you can say, no, I want you to run at least for 10 seconds and tell me how many times this thing runs. You can force the display to use pandas, which is the default, or grid. So whenever you do a select, you'll see a grid format by default. And you can do multiple options on a command line. So you can see I said set the max grid to 10 and display grid. All right, so now you've seen single SQL statement. So here's a block, all right? You'll notice I use the double %sign, and in there, I can do multiple things at one time. So I drop a table, I create a table, and I insert values. This all can be done in one big block. Now you notice an error message is displayed because I didn't define the night show table. The code continues to run, okay? It doesn't stop because there's an error. There are ways of suppressing those messages, okay? Or you use some of the new 11.5 syntax. It says create if not exists table, okay? If you weren't aware of that, we have a lab that takes you through all that new 11.5 syntax. So anyway, that's what the %SQL thing does, all right? And by the way, you can change the delimiter, okay? If you don't like semicolon because you're writing triggers or store procedures, just use the -D flag, which will say, I want to use the @ as the delimiter. And here you can notice I said quiet, don't have any messages. So by the way, what kind of SQL can I run in here? Well, I can create store procedures, I can create functions, I can create indexes, I can do just about anything in this block of SQL. Okay, so it's very, very flexible on what you can do. That's one of the reasons we built this, so we can do all sorts of examples and tutorials using SQL within Jupyter Notebooks. To do this in Python natively is an incredible amount of work, okay? So we made it simple for you. Now, the other thing you can do with these single %SQL commands is to place the results into a variable. So here's an example where I say a variable is equal to the select statement, select everything from night show. So what this does is it creates something called a Panda data frame variable. So if you're using the Panda data frames statistics or graphing, this variable now can be used with any of those Panda functions. But from our purposes here, we can use that variable now to either show all the results. So you can see, you just say, put the variable into a command line, hit enter, and you'll actually see the results because Jupyter says, aha, that's how I display Panda data frame. Or you can use the syntax that says, give me the column name. Okay, in this case, you have to know the exact column name, and you have to, and it's case sensitive, all right? And then 0 is the first row. Okay, so I'm saying, give me the announcer column row 0, the first row. So if I wanted speaker, I'd say show speaker 0, right? So this is good as long as you know what the names of your columns are. You can also say something like this. You could say, give me the raw format. So it's a -r flag or raw. And basically what it does is it creates an array or a Python array. And you can see the first row of the array are the columns, and the second and third and so on are the actual rows. So if I want to see the first row of data, so show row 1 and column 0, then you can see that's Martin's in there, all right? So two ways of looking at the data. If you use the -r flag, it's like a traditional array with the first column, first row always being the column titles, or you could say just SQL without the -r, and you're using then the name of the column and then the row to get the data, okay? So now that I've got data in a variable, I could write applications in Python, right, to deal with this data. Another neat thing is you can use variables. So variables are supplied to a SQL statement using this colon variable name syntax. Okay, this may look familiar to some of you, right, when compiled SQL, right? So here basically I'm saying select from the night show where speaker equals, and I pass it a variable. And so we will substitute George into that and you get your results. And the funny thing is you can do all sorts of neat stuff. You can even have in lists like this. So here I said employees and I got 3 of them in an in list, or this is an array. And I say where employee is in bracket and the variable, and we will unwrap the array and execute it with it, make an in list for you. So you can do all sorts of things which we call Pythonistic, okay? Because Python has a way of dealing with variables and values, so we can do the same thing with the SQL command, okay? So we've tried to make it as easy to transition between the Python world and a DB2 world. There's another way to do this as well. If you want to do substitution of things that aren't variables, like SQL variables, but stuff like column names, you can do that as well. That's a very special syntax. You use this curly brace, okay? So you'll notice I said columns equals no and last name. So imagine somebody, you say to someone, what columns would you like? And you select whatever columns. And all you do is you create a little string like this, those are your column names, and then we'll expand it in the select statement for you, okay? But that's typically used for things outside of variables. They're usually for like column names or order by or something that you need to dynamically create the names, okay? A big restriction with this format can only be used with the %SQL commands. You can't use it in a block, okay? That substitution does not occur in a block. The variables can be used in blocks, all right? But not this substitution format with the curly braces. Now, inserts, pretty simple, right? In fact, inserts, updates, deletes, merge, they all work, all right? Use the same kind of SQL syntax, insert into some table values, hello, right? Quotes are tricky, by the way, and I think this is true for any language. You know, you have to double quote something in order to get a single one. So here's an example, right? With hello with a apostrophe S. By the way, if you really want to make it simple, just create a string using a variable in Python and just say values, because we'll take care of the quoting. We'll actually check the string and put the right number of quotes in there for you so it doesn't, you know, screw up your life, okay? Now, what about JSON? Look at this. You can say, here's a dictionary, which is equivalent to a JSON, right? In Python, where you notice it says X equals first name and Martin, last name Hubel. And I can just say insert into a table using that variable. And what we do is we convert your JSON dictionary, this Python, and put it into a string inside DB2. And now you can use all of our new JSON ISO functions to retrieve values out of that field. And you can also do the reverse on output. We'll actually allow you to select from a column, and I want you to make it into a dictionary or into a JSON object within Python. So again, very easy for moving data back and forth between DB2 and JSON documents in Python. By the way, we got some neat little things that you could do with the command line as well. You can also say, hey, I've got some data that I'm retrieving. I want you to plot it for me, right? Give me a pie chart or a bar chart or a line chart. Okay, so that's kind of built in for very quick plotting. If you want sophisticated stuff, what I would suggest you do is you you do your select and assign it to a variable, and then use all the functions that are available to you in the Panda data frame to do very, very sophisticated plotting and analysis. Okay. But again, the whole idea is we make it easy for you to extract data out of DB2 into a variable that can now be used in Python or many of these other packages which expect the data to be in this Python format. So some other things we've also done with this. So far I've just shown you dynamic SQL, right? And by default, everything is auto commit on. If you want, you can turn that on or off. And you can also create commit scopes with your statements. So you could say commit work, commit hold, and rollback. So again, this gives you the option of saying, yeah, I'm going to start some SQL. If I don't like it, I can just undo it all, right? So that's an option for you. Plus, if you're doing any kind of bulk loading, you may want to turn auto commit off while you do your SQL inserts or whatever it is, and then turn it back on after you've done your commit. Okay. The other good thing is that we also understand stored procedures. And we will return the answer sets for you and also all of the variables that have been updated as part of the parameter set. So there's two ways of calling stored procedures. The first one here is where it returns a result set from your procedure and all the variables, okay, all of the parameters, okay, that you sent to it. So you'll notice that your SQL call says call a procedure, and you'll have whatever number of parameters there. And stored procedures, you know, some of the parameters could be in, out, or both, right? So we will return what the in-out values are for all of those parameters back to those Python variables. Okay, so you got to match those variables to your parameters. You have to do that with the -r flag. Okay, if you just want the results set, just do a regular call. You just say SQL call your bin command describe table, and it comes back as an answer set. Okay, and you know, we throw away all of the variables that or the parameter markers, right? So again, very easy to call administrative functions within DB2, call your own procedures, right? Try things out. So again, a lot of flexibility here of how you run different types of SQLs within DB2. Now, from a programming perspective, we also give you the flexibility of doing prepare and execute. And most of you are familiar with that, right? If you're going to run a statement many, many times, you may be better off doing a prepare and then execute with different parameter markers. So that is also built into this environment, right? The big bonus here is that when I execute, you know, the prepare has already been done, so I can remove a lot of the overhead of running the code. So you can prepare the following statements, right? Basically all your DML, right? Select, insert, update, delete, merge, right? And you say statement or some variable equals %SQL prepare your statement. Now we need that statement because we obviously are creating what we call a statement handle, right? This is the prepared statement. And that's what I'm going to use as part of my execute, right? So the first thing is you prepare your statement, we place the results of that prepare into a statement variable, and then we use it for subsequent executes. So the execute statement basically says, okay, give me the statement, and you'll notice I use the colon statement because it's a variable I need to get the values. And then using whatever either Python variables, constants, whatever you need, right, for the parameter markers you had in your original prepare, okay? So the using clause allows 3 different types of values in there. So you notice it says SQL execute a statement using, there's constants, right? So you can have numbers, whatever, character strings, decimals, right? And then the variables can be handled in 2 different ways. The little $x means there's a variable called x, it's a Python variable. I want you to take the contents of that variable and place it into this execute statement. Okay, so what we do is something called materialization. Okay, so if x was a character string, we would put proper quotes around it. If it was a number, it would just be a number, right? If you put the variable name without that colon, what we do is we create a what we call is a link, a dynamic link to that variable. That means that when execute runs, it will take the contents of that object and use that as part of the execute. So rather than trying to materialize it, we actually take it dynamically, right? Like basically an address, a pointer. Why would you do that? Well, think about things like binary objects, a picture, right? How do I materialize a picture, right? As a string. It's difficult to do, right? Almost impossible. So what you would do is that would be a variable that points to the binary object, and then we would materialize it as part of the execute, okay? So you don't have to put it into this string. So when you do that, when you create these variables, you know, when you prepare a statement, you have question marks in the prepare statement. You don't necessarily know what those data types are, and sometimes you have to cast those things. Well, you don't have to cast here. What you can do is say in your execute statement what these variables are. Okay, so you'll notice here I can say it's an integer, a binary, a decimal, a character string, right? And so we will know that you are going to have this act as an integer and tell the execute statement that this is how it's being cast as, right? So again, that allows us the ability now to use things like binary objects and move them into an execute statement and properly handle them, right? Rather than trying to convert them to something else. Okay, by default, everything's a character string. So here's an example. Okay, you'll notice there's a block of SQL at the top that says drop a table, create a table, right? And then you'll see there's a little bit of code there that I've run. And you'll see statement handle equals prepare, insert into integers, values, question mark, there's your parameter marker. And then while I is less than 10, execute, right? And so it's executing that statement using I as an integer, and then I select from the result. And so you can see there's a very simple block of code that I've created. So I'm not limited to just doing SQL in a cell or in a block. I can write SQL as part of a bunch of Python code. Okay, so again, I can do some very sophisticated stuff using these SQL extensions, right, in Jupyter Notebooks. Now, by the way, there's lots more options that you have on SQL statements, by the way. I've shown you some of them already. A couple of the other ones that might interest you, there's the timer. So basically that runs your statement as many times as it can in a second. Okay? And that's where you may want to use things like set it to 10 seconds or 100 seconds. How many times does this thing run? You know, to try different executions, right? -J and -JSON are very useful. This is for retrieving individual columns as a JSON structure or taking an entire answer set and making it a JSON array. So I'll show you an example of that. Sample data, if you've got a database that isn't the sample database, if you just run that, you say SQL sample data, we will generate the employee and department table for you to try things out with, okay? So let me show you an example of the retrieving data as a JSON record. So here I said -JSON select asterisk from the employee table, fetch first row, and you'll notice it's come back as an array and a JSON document of all of the fields in that row. And you'll notice we use lowercase, which is kind of the standard, right, for a lot of these JSON documents, and then the values for all of the things. Okay, if we can figure out the data type, we'll make a character string or numeric, okay? But in any case, we can return an entire array of JSON records for you. So again, if you need to get data out of DB2, make it look like a JSON object, all you have to do is use this flag, and now I can throw that to my Python system or to some other app that needs the data to look like JSON, okay? Now, by the way, you can also do this with using the new JSON publishing features that are available as part of 11.5, and actually it's 11.1 Fixback 4, so that you can actually do that as a SQL call. But if you're within the Jupyter Notebook environment, I could just do it with this single call. Now, on top of all that stuff that you've seen, we've also done a couple things to make life a little bit easier when it comes to doing SQL that you repeat a lot, okay? And we call that SQL macros. And basically it allows me to create a command that under the covers is actually a bunch of SQL that I want to run, okay? So here's an example of one. There's an entire document that describes how to do this stuff, but this is creating a macro called describe, and you can see basically it just says, okay, basically, did you give me enough arguments? If not, I'll give you an error code. Otherwise, I'm going to call admin command with the arguments that you passed me, okay? And these are actually predefined for you in the DB2 library. So we've got two of them. One is describe, the other one is list tables, okay? And you can see it's just like a normal syntax, SQL syntax, but under the covers is actually a macro, right? So if there's something that you do a lot, right, create a macro for it, and then you just put it as part of your SQL command, right? Rather than creating functions and stuff. So you can see there's a lot of capability behind this. So if you want to try any of these things, we actually have a library of demos available for you, okay? And I'm going to show you some of this stuff in a sec. But basically, we've got a number of these labs, hands-on labs, that you can sign up for. And it is a system running on SkyTab, which is a VMware in the cloud, basically. And when you sign up, you know, you just need your IBM user ID, create one if you don't have one. You select the lab that you want. It asks for what region you're in. It's a good thing to say you're in North America somewhere. Otherwise, we could put it in Asia if you want, but your response time will be terrible, right? It takes about 2 or 3 minutes for us to provision the system. And then basically you log in, okay? And you've got a full working DB2 system. Okay, it's running 11.5. It's got all of these labs in it, okay? Well, in fact, you pick which lab you want, all right? So basically, it's, you'll have lunchtime, let's say you got an hour, right? So any one of these is meant to be about an hour long in terms of trying things out. So you want to learn about 11.5, yep, off you go. Learn about all those functions, etc. And it's using all of this SQL magic commands to run it, okay? And it's a great learning environment because once you're done, you just close it, done, right? You haven't installed anything on your system. Okay, so let me show you an example of one of these labs running, okay? So we're gonna go to this one here. You can see it's a digital technical engagement. So when you log on, it will give you a user ID called DB2 Proof of Technology, and we'll give you the password for the system. And once you get in, you'll get a screen that looks like this. And you'll notice what it is a bunch of things that you can work on. So for instance, the introduction to Jupyter Notebooks. I've already given you a little bit of an overview. If you're interested in it, click on the arrow, and up comes a Jupyter Notebook. Okay, and what this book will tell you, or this document will tell you, is all about what Jupyter Notebooks are. And you can see you can scroll down. It's basically like a web document, right? It's really no different, except your formatting here looks like a Word document. See, and as I go down, I can read this. I can go back to my table of contents. If I want to learn all about the magic commands we just talked about, I have an entire lab on this. So you'll go in there and you'll see it takes a few seconds. I don't have the world's fastest machine here. And when it comes up, you'll see the difference between what we call code cells and document cells. So you notice here, this is text, and here is code. And you'll notice when I click on this one, it's in blue, text, green, code. So to run anything that's in here, I use the run button, okay? Or you can also do shift enter or shift return. So you notice if the little star here is running, that means it's actually executing some code. And you notice what it did, it loaded our extensions. We have a document here that is a connect for this particular server. You'll never guess what the user ID and password is, DB2Inst1 and DB2Inst1. And then it takes you through all the different syntax options. So we show you how to connect. We show you how to set up credentials, the different commands, etc. So, all right, you've learned all about extensions. Now let's get into the meat of it. You want to learn about JSON. So you can see here we've got, I think about 10 different sections for you to go in and learn about every single one of these functions. And it's not just reading. This is actual, let me show you how this thing works, right? Let me show you an example, right? How do I do nesting of arrays in JSON? And in fact, we even include our book in here. So if you're interested in JSON, right, and all of the JSON functions, you can get it right within this lab or download it to your own system, okay? So we give you lots of value in these things. So let me show you an example of another, a notebook. Let's just try a blank notebook just to show you how easy this is, okay? So I'm gonna go to what we call a table of contents. These are all different things that we have in here. Let's just create a new document, okay? And so this is a blank document that you could do anything with, okay? You'll notice this has the green line, so this is code. If I wanted to do documentation, it's called Markdown. So we even give you details how to do Markdown, but basically, this is a title, right? Okay, so you notice when I hit enter, it becomes text. So that's how you document stuff. You just say this is a text field and I'm going to do something with it. So the first thing I always have to do, if I'm going to run any DB2, is I run that command. And that loads the library that I need to run all this DB2 stuff, right? So now I got to do a connect. So again, I'm going to say, connect to sample. And then I have user, DB2Inst1 using DB2Inst1, right? And my host in this case is localhost. Don't have to necessarily do that. And then I have port 50,000, okay? And I hit enter and it connects successfully. All right, so now I'm able to do anything from this system. The only thing I can't do is shut the dog up that's next door. Okay, so there you can see that I've done the select statement. If I wanted to see that in a grid, I do it like this. Okay, and you'll notice I've got this scrollable grid now. And I can scroll back and forth, right? So I am now fully in control of all the things I can do against DB2. So if I wanted to do a block, I could do the following. I can say drop table junk, and I'll say it's A as an integer, and then I can do insert into, oops. It's got no spell check, by the way. I can't do anything about that, all right? And then I can say select asterisk from junk. And you notice everything ran as a block. So, you know, it gives you, like I said, all sorts of flexibility to build stuff in here. Now, let me show you a couple other things with this. The other thing that I can do is I mentioned the plotting and stuff. So, for instance, I can do, give me 1 sec. I just have to kill a dog.
It does sound like you killed it. Mine just learned to bump his head into my lower leg, which means that he wants a cookie. And if I give him one, he's quiet and he leaves for 5 seconds.
Worst thing that happens to me is that people who have dogs on the phone while my dog is in the room and it thinks there's a dog locally and it just goes nuts.
Oh boy.
Anyways,
yeah.
All right, so let me quickly show you this. So once you've got stuff in a variable, you can do all sorts of things. So you notice up here I said select asterisk from employee, right? So I could have said x equals, see, so now it's in a variable. And this allows me now to do things like, if I just do the letter X, it actually shows you the results, right? So this is now available to me to do other things. So if I said I only wanted, let's say last name, and if you just give me a particular row, you'll get the last name for that row. You notice Haas. If you don't put anything there, you get the entire list, right? So it gives you a lot of flexibility what to do with the data. And then once I've got that data, I can, like I said, throw it into different plotting routines. I could use, write a little application to scroll through that, so the key thing that we find from this or take away from this is one, I can try out all of my routines here first, right? Document what I'm doing or try my SQL out here, right? I can share this notebook with other users if they want. I can also do things like if I want to write little programs to do stuff, I could put it within a notebook and actually execute a notebook. So notebooks have the ability to be saved, and then you can say, I want you to run all of this over again. So if I go back to the top of this, I can say, I'm going to say clear, okay? And then I can say run all. You notice it will now go through and run all the stuff that I've done. So you could write a script if you wanted to that did a number of things in your system, right? And have it all documented here. So we find this really good for doing stuff that's repetitive, but also for teaching people stuff and also for prototyping, okay? So it's a great product for doing that. Okay, I didn't show you all. There are still more advanced things that you can do with this environment. But what I do is I will encourage you to go take a look at our labs online and try some of those things out. And by the way, if you are interested in Python programming, we have an entire section on that, okay? We actually show you the APIs and stuff. And if you're curious, you can open up the DB2 notebook and learn how the actual Python functions are used. So you can see in a second, it's a pretty large notebook. It's got, I don't know, about 5,000 lines of code. You can see it's not going very fast here. Come on. There it is, okay. So it actually, we try to document what we've done in here. So you can see there's lots of examples, tells you about development SQL. And there you can see there's the actual code. It's terrible coding, okay? But anyways, if you're curious how this stuff is done, you can read through all of the actual code. All right, let me flip back to my thing. All right, so I want you to all, after Christmas, not before Christmas, too busy, right? After Christmas, when you have a chance, go to ibm.com/demos and search for DB2, right? That should be pretty straightforward, right? So let me do that for you so you can see it, okay? Let's open up a new window. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let me just make it big, okay? This was actually something we're quite proud of in our area, because you know how hard it is to get like a site right off the IBM.com. It takes a lot of work. So you'll see here it says a bunch of different things that you can look at. And by the way, I encourage you, if you want, to look at all the different things. But in here you'll see by product. I know it's very, very small here, but there's DB2. And for DB2, we have lots of stuff. We've got things like you want to learn about the database, the warehouse on cloud, videos from some person here. I don't know who that is. Product tours. Product tours, by the way, are where we've captured the steps in the database, and we kind of make you go through the steps. You're clicking and pointing and stuff, but it's kind of like a fake demo, right? But you kind of get a sense of how something is done. And then you want to go to the hands-on labs. So you see one right here, right now. This is using 11.1. It hasn't been updated to 11.5. So you can try this if you like. We are going to add all the rest of them that you've seen. They're already ready to go. We're just waiting for some final approvals. They'll all show up in here. And then you pick which one you're interested in. And so basically, if you want to do one of these, you'll click on it. First thing it's going to do is ask you to sign in. All right. Once you sign in, it gives you some details of it. You log in with the IBM ID, and then it'll reserve an instance for you. And it takes no more than 2 to 3 minutes to get a link to a running server. And like I said, you don't install anything. You're up and running, okay, and you try these things out. So please, I encourage you, my life depends on it, okay? That you go to demos and try this thing out, okay? Lots of additional resources, by the way. The JSON book you can get if you want. It's at ibm.biz/db2json. And my GitHub repository has all sorts of samples, plus how to get the Docker container up and running and the DB2 notebook stuff in there, okay? So that gives you an update of what we're doing with Jupyter. And by the way, we're not stopping there. We're adding a new notebook or a new lab that's coming that's talking about the Go language. So if anybody's interested in Go, we're gonna have a tutorial on Go itself, plus how to talk to DB2 through Go, right? Visual Studio Code, right, is in that as well. So you learn how to install that and use it to query and look at DB2, RESTful APIs. So all sorts of new topics are coming up. We're really trying to help you be more productive with some of the new technology that's coming out of DB2 today. So with that, Martin, I'm done at the end of my presentation. So if you want to open it up for any kind of Q&A or additional questions people might have.
Just check the question and answer tool here. And we have, in addition to parsing out the output of select queries as raw array and the tabular format, can Jupyter parse out the query output as in JSON format?
Oh, so you want the results to come back in a JSON format, I'm assuming? Yes, you can. There's 2 ways to do that. Let me just bring up my notebook here, and I take my blank untitled notebook here. And let me just show you an example of that. So if you remember our employee table, so if I say select asterisk from employee, fetch first, oops, sorry, apologies for the typing, first row only. Okay, so there is Christine, right? So if I want that to show up as a JSON row, there's the object right there. Okay, so I got it as JSON. So I can also do an assignment statement. So if I do X equals that, okay. Now if I just look at X, you'll notice it is an array of, it is a structure, like it's a JSON object or dictionary. Okay? If there were multiple rows, if I said fetch first 5 rows only, there's a nice thing too. You see, I can go edit these things and run them again, right? So there you can see there's the array of JSON, okay? So now if you're in the variable X, right? I get the syntax wrong all the time, so I apologize here, but I think it's something like row 0 and I want employee number. Yeah, there you go. Okay? Yeah. So it knows about the dictionary. The other way to do it, by the way, is if you have a particular column that is actually JSON data.
Right.
So let me show you that. So that's a slightly different syntax. So if I'm going to say create table JSON, okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say data varchar, okay, 20, and make sure I drop the stupid table. Odds are I'll have something in there. Okay, let's just make sure we got it. Okay, that's good.
Or you could say where not exists.
Yes, I could. I could. Very good. Yes, you've been reading on the new 11.5 features.
No, I was
okay. So here
today.
Oh, you were okay. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to say, all right. So let's use X. It's overused already, but let me do it up here so people can see it a little easier. So let's say X equals, and let's make it into a JSON structure. And I'm going to say first. So you notice Python has this ability to do this, and there are some slight differences with Python, JSON, and but it's close enough. Okay, so there it is. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to insert that into the database. So I'm going to say SQL insert into JSON values X. Oops, that's right. Oh, did I make it too small? Idiot. This is what I like, though, is I go back here, I fix it, run it, done, okay? That's what I mean, prototyping, trial and error. Everything I do is error. Every now and then it works, okay? So now if I select from this table, you notice it's just a materialized string, right? So if I want to retrieve that as a JSON object, there it is, okay? So, we'll move it in and out as JSON, or I can take your entire row and make it into a JSON, right? So lots of options. Go wild. Oh, and if you wanted to, by the way, I could do the following. And this is where you want to take the entire lab, right? So JSON value, right, of data, which is the field, and I want the last name, did I call it last, right? There it is. So we can use all these built-in native JSON functions now to extract individual values, structures, arrays, create a table, right, based from the parts of the document. So if you do our lab on JSON, you can see it gets quite complex. Right. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, I believe it does. Thanks. And follow on from Ernest as well. Does it give you the size of the JSON object resulting from the query output?
No. Okay. So the size is not. No, it doesn't tell me the size of the output. Okay. The thing is, if I use the JSON value function, for instance, it gives you it as basically a clob, right? Right. So it'll fit whatever's in there. But I mean, obviously, I could do a length function against it, but no, I don't tell you what it is.
Okay. Another question from Charles. When viewing a grid, how are blob and clob columns displayed?
Not very well. It's basically a bunch of binary. It truncates it, okay? Right. It'll just look like a binary thing. So, for instance, in this example here where we created our table, let me go down here. So here JSON, right? Instead of varchar, we could have called this var binary, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we do that, and then what we have to do is when we insert into that table, we have to convert it, right? Because DB2 doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, right? Sure. So insert into here, and what I would do is JSON to BSON.
Sure.
Oops. Again, too long. Oh, you know what? Yeah, funny things happen when you do this. All right. There we go. So now let's select it, right? See, JSON value still gets it. You notice that? Even though it was binary data this time, right? The functions are smart enough to know. But if you didn't do that and you just say selected asterisk, yeah, right, and we'll do a grid, yeah, it will look like crap. See?
Oh, okay. Well,
okay.
Certainly.
Although some of it is slightly readable, right? Yeah, but okay.
Fair enough. Okay.
So get out your calculator and figure out what it is.
Right. Indeed. Yeah, those I guess are the binary representations.
Right.
Yeah. All right, let me take over control. I've got a bit more housekeeping to do just to finish off here. But that's really good. I'll put my screen up now, hopefully now. Where's my screen? That's right there. That's good. And just a very quick commercial break to end off. We have a couple of things here to talk about. Let me just get my, this is a new version of DBI's web suite. And this is the, it's the web performance suite from DBI. It will allow a DBA to have a holistic view of all the databases with the ability to compare performance across databases and see the ones that are best and worst performing. And it will allow you to give you minimum and average database scores that indicate the health. DBI has developed a score out of 10,000. You hit 10,000, it's perfect. If you are, have a really bad database, it turns out to be 0. And there can be a wide range in between. I've had some that are 0. I've had some that are close to being perfect. Here's another dashboard showing the ability to look at the various things over time in terms of performance, and also to see relevant metrics on CPU load, memory usage, read and write times, etc. And then you can drill down on those as well. If you find if you are finding something you don't like, you can drill down further. And that ability to drill down takes you to a certain point in time. From there as well, it also not only shows the metrics, but it also shows the any changes that have been made to the database. Those are also highlighted on the charts. Any schema changes if an index was added and that sort of thing. And lastly, you can monitor all transaction and execution times to detect whether the performance issue is within or outside of the database, and determine where your bottlenecks are. So, helpful graphics to help you isolate problems and to share that information with management as needed. Okay, that was our short commercial from DBI Software, the founding sponsor of the show. I'll do our final poll here, which is, did you learn anything today? We'll launch that and see what people have to say. And as expected, you see that everyone learned something today. George, I'm not surprised. I learned a lot today. Great session.
But you see, you had to add another thing to it. I find learned something useful today. See, I was hoping it was useful.
No. You learn something every day, but I'm sure if people were on this session for the last hour, they learned something.
Yeah.
That was, you don't have to be as self-deprecating Canadian as we all are. That's why we're good comedy writers in Hollywood.
Right.
All right, with that takes me to my last slide. So it's time to cue the music. And thank you once again for a great show. Let me do that before the music drowns me out. Thank you again for a great show. And I'll have the PDF of these slides up, as well as the replays later on today or tomorrow, depending on how quickly I get moving today. I've got a few Christmas type things I've got to do this afternoon, but I'd like to thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time on the DB2Night show next week for developer topics, and the same thing in with the LUW show with Michael Roken in January the 10th, and then Craig Mullins at the end of the month. Take care, all. Thanks for coming. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Nice.